During the Second Indochina War, the Communists Indochina formed an alliance against South Vietnam and its allies. While the alliance prevailed throughout the war, Cambodia continuously feared an imminent takeover by Vietnam in order to establish an Indochina Federation under Vietnamese leadership. While Cambodia officially declared neutrality during the Vietnam War, North Vietnam still proceeded to establish a base area and sanctuaries in the east of the country. Without this involvement, war efforts in the south would have been much more challenging. Their presence was at first tolerated by Prince Sihanouk of Cambodia, but later the aide to the violent anti-government Khmer Rouge urged him to travel to Moscow and demand the cessation of support. However, efforts took a turn when his government dismissed him during his absence. Following wide-scale protests, the Vietnamese minority was violently targeted in the capital city. On the 15th of April, 800 bodies floated down the Mekong Delta into South Vietnam. The new head of the state, Prime Minister Lon Nol, demanded that the North Vietnamese leave the country, but they refused and promptly invaded the new republic on request of the Khmer Rouge. In return, the Prime Minister asked for United States aid. Prince Sihanouk returned later that year and allied with the Khmer Rouge, which quickly grew from 6,000 to 50,000 men. The government also called on Cambodians for recruitment, and 70,000 rallied to their cause. This issue would no longer be resolved peacefully. The North Vietnamese invasion completely changed the course of the civil war. Lands containing nearly half of the Cambodian population were conquered and handed over to the Khmer Rouge. This resulted in the Cambodian government being greatly weakened and the insurgents increasing in size multifold over the course of a few weeks. On the 29th of April 1970, South Vietnamese and United States units unleashed a limited, multi-pronged Cambodian campaign. Extensive logical installations and large amounts of supplies were found and destroyed. But still larger amounts of military material had already been moved further from the border. Due to the eventual withdrawal, the Khmer Rouge once again seized control of the regions. Despite large financial aid, corrupt officers from the governmental forces withheld payment, food, and even sold supplies to their enemies. This caused a low point in morale and high desertion rates. During Operation Chen Le Tu, the retake of Kompong Thorn, the Republican forces lost 10 battalions and the initiative for ongoing operations. From that point forward, the war was decided. The Khmer Rouge gradually cut supply lines into the countryside and squeezed Phnom Penh dry day by day until it fell on the 17th of April 1975, thus ending the civil war and starting the Cambodian genocide, which would result in the killing of roughly 2 million people, about a quarter of the population at the time. Cambodia and Vietnam have a long history of hostilities which never really subsided. The party leadership held strong suspicions that Vietnam would take over their country and form an Indochina Union under Hanoi. With a foreseeable victory in sight, the Khmer Rouge purged their own ranks from Hanoi-trained members as well as those loyal to the king. The leader of the newly formed Democratic Kampuchea, Pol Pot, ordered the invasion of the Vietnamese island of Phu Quoc on the 1st of May 1975, barely 24 hours after the fall of Saigon, claiming it was Cambodian territory. 9 days later, the Tho Chu Islands were occupied and 500 Vietnamese civilians were executed. The counter-offensive immediately drove away the invaders. This was just the beginning of progressively worsening border clashes. Pol Pot kept a borderline relationship with Hanoi. On one side, he invaded territory. On the other side, he flew to Vietnam and proclaimed friendship between the socialist nations. In 1977, Cambodia kept raiding and executing Vietnamese citizens in their territory. Angered by the conflict, Vietnam gathered 60,000 men and retaliated against the invaders. However, at that point, they still had good faith and forced Cambodia to negotiate. After yet another withdrawal, Cambodia invaded again in 1978. This time, the village of Ba Chuk was occupied and massacred. Over 3,000 civilians were killed. Vietnam ran out of patience and carried out a full-scale invasion. After just 2 weeks, Phnom Penh was occupied and Cambodia lost half of its military. The Cambodian government sought refuge in the jungle, while resistance groups formed in the west of the country. China, Cambodia's ally, invaded the northern part of Vietnam with over 200,000 men, forcing the withdrawal in Cambodia. However, their half-hearted efforts proved fruitless as fierce resistance kept them at bay. 3 weeks and 120,000 casualties later, they seized the occupation. Despite clashes with insurgents, the country slowly recovered from decades of war. In 1989, after 10 years, Vietnam left the country, which was now subject to a much-needed international peacekeeping mission. It was only in 1998 that the Khmer Rouge dissolved completely. Border clashes with insurgents still occurred until 1991, when the Paris Peace Accords were signed, thus ending the Third Indochina War, a conflict that had lasted an additional 16 years. About 50,000 Vietnamese soldiers lost their life. On the Cambodian side, 15,000 became victims of war. 230,000 civilians shared the same fate. By the end of the Third Indochina War, 45 years had passed, from 1946 to 1991. During this time period, it's estimated that up to 4.4 million people died due to combat-related activities. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Vietnam established diplomatic relationships with the United States and opened up to the world. Its economy grew from $14 billion in 1985 to $245 billion 35 years later. The average income grew from $231 to $2,451, with an upward trend. Laos and Cambodia have similar stories, with an average growth of 8% per year. After all that the people have been through, it is well deserved.